Hello and welcome to this talk on Holocaust research on trial presented by Judisk kultur i Sverige, Jewish culture in Sweden, in the series Democracy. My name is Karin Kvist Geverts and I'm an associate professor in history at the National Library of Sweden. We are very happy to present to you Professor Jan Grabowski of the University of Ottawa in Canada, a professor in history and a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Jan Grabowski, his research includes the issues surrounding the extermination of the Polish Jews, as well as the history of Jewish-Polish relations during 1939 till 1945 period. Professor Grabowski is the author of several monographs, including Hunt for Jews, Betrayal and Murder in the German-occupied Poland, published by Indiana University Press in 2013, which won the Yad Vashem International Book Prize in 2014. The book, which our talk will center on tonight, is edited by you, and it was published in Poland in 2018. And in English, the title reads Night Without an End, the Fate of Jews in Selected Counties of Occupied Poland. We are very honored to have you here. Very welcome, Professor Jan Grabowski.
Well, Karin, thank you very much for this most kind invitation. I'm delighted to be with my Swedish friends after 1 year since my last visit to Sweden. Thank you.
Yes, because you were here a year ago in 2020 and gave several lectures on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we were very delighted to have you hear them. So, Jan, may I call you Jan?
Of course.
Okay, great. So last week, you and Professor Barbara Engelking made the headlines around the world when you were charged and convicted for libel in a court in Warsaw, Poland. And you are now in Warsaw, right, Jan?
Yes, I mean, it was, I have been here to face the court. I arrived already several weeks prior to this meeting, to the court meeting. And well, to make the long story short, we are now facing an appeal process, which is, of course, fraught with different, let's say, dangers due to the direct involvement of the Polish state in this affair, but I guess we'll talk about this at length. However, I am full of respect for judge's decision. I disagree with it, and so does my co-author, Professor Barbara Engelking, and we both intend to launch an appeal.
Yes, because historians around the world have condemned the trial and expressed support for you and Professor Engelking and the rest of the team. It's not very usual, is it, that you actually would face a court for the research that you do, but this is a possibility in Poland. So could you tell us a little bit more? What is the problem? Why are you on trial?
You know, the whole thing is, it requires, especially for people living in a normal democratic world such as you, requires, you know, a short introduction. I hope I will not be presumptuous here. But the thing is that the book at the center of this whole story is a very, well, I won't be here modest, but a significant study which has received high praise from academics, from specialists in the history of the Holocaust. Basically, what you have here are 2 volumes, 1,700 pages, 9 authors. I am co-editor and co-author. Basically, you have a very significant piece of work that has been conducted over 6 years by a team.
Several years, yes.
Years it took, 3 continents, countless archives. Basically what we did, it was an extension of an inquiry that I did in my previous book, the one you mentioned. We wanted to see here how far my findings, which have been limited to only one county of occupied Poland, what happened, how much you can, let's say, how much you can extend this inquiry into other areas of occupied Poland. Can you make generalizations? Basically, we tried to look at the Jews who survived, you know, the deportations to the extermination camps in the spring, summer, and fall of 1942. And who decided to hide on so-called Aryan side. We chose the understudied parts of rural Poland, where majority of Poland's Jews dwelled. And then we went on the level of individual trajectories. So we could quantify. We wanted to quantify. Because normally what you do is in a history of the Holocaust, you talk about many people did this, many Jews did something else. Some people, you know, we wanted to go beyond some we wanted to assign certain quantifiable data. And we came up with, it was not the Poles, but the Jews were our focus. However, by extension, when we explored the fates of the Jews, we started to write more and more about the reactions of the Polish society in this late stage of the Holocaust, so-called hunt for the Jews stage. And what we found was that in vast majority of cases, the fate of these Jews who went into hiding was directly dependent on the attitudes of local Polish population. Because once the Jews went into hiding, the Germans had preciously little idea of where to look for them. However, Polish collaborationist police, Polish neighbors, they had a very good idea who was keeping whom and where the Jews were hidden. And this was the denunciation or outright murder became the pattern of that we also studied. So you can easily imagine that the reaction of the authorities, very nationalistic authorities, was furious, and their NGOs which support them, they are funded by them. Now, mind you, we published our volumes in the spring of 2018, exactly when the so-called Polish Holocaust law has been voted by the Polish parliament, the one that stipulated 3 years in prison for people who would suggest that Polish nation has been complicit in Nazi crimes. So there was this outrageous, I would say, attack on scholars. I don't want to go on and on. I mean, you
and
can
a very tense situation, John. But what happened with that law? Was that ever, is it in effect now? Because it's not that law that you are convicted by, right?
Yes and no. So what happens when the authorities created this, let's say, instituted this the 3-year in prison legislation for historians and educators? They, of course, Poland became a pariah on the international arena. There were protests from all around the world, and even the Polish government had to admit that they were in over their heads. And at the end of June, they withdrew, without any consultation, discussion, they quickly withdrew the criminal provisions of the law. So no longer 3 years in jail. However, what the Prime Minister of Poland, Mr. Morawiecki, at the time said, they said that we, the government, we the authorities, we reserved ourselves all the tools of civil procedure, which will enable us to punish these slanders to the full extent of civil law. We will bankrupt them. We will go after them with the help of friendly NGOs. And this is precisely what you see now. So on the face of this story, you have one elderly woman who felt, who wants to defend the memory of her long deceased uncle. And let's say it's tenuous uncle, it's not father, but still, let's say a normal, regular civil pursuit would be nothing I would protest against. However, this is only on the surface. When you scratch a bit in the courtroom, what I heard, there is an organization called the Polish Anti-Defamation League. Actually, this is their English name. In reality, their Polish name is the Redoubt of the Defense of the Good Name of Polish Nation. A silly name, but they are now a rather dangerous organization. They are well funded by the Polish government to pursue let's say, act as a proxy for the authorities. So what they do is they hire researchers who go after footnotes in our book, compare the footnotes to original documents in the archives, and whenever they think that there is a smoking gun, they, let's say in this case, they go to a village, they look for people, they try to initiate a lawsuit, which they did in this case. Sorry.
So this is what happened here then, Jan. They found something, but is there something wrong with your research, or what is it that they are into here? Tell us more. Yeah.
Right. No, the problem is that they are people without any experience, of course. They are not scholars of the Holocaust. So what they do, they compare the footnotes. In this case, what they did is they compared the footnote and they saw that there was a reference to a trial in 1950, which actually found individual in question not guilty of having murdered or denounced the Jews. However, in the text, Professor Engelking, my co-author, it was her part, her chapter, she wrote that a Jewish survivor reported this village elder as being complicit in the massacre of 22 Jews. So they said, no, she is wrong, because here you have a court testimony from 1950. Now, the problem is that these people did not know that in historical writing, if you don't quote someone directly, you can simply place the archival material not in a footnote, but in your bibliography as something that you used, which is entirely legitimate, and that's what Professor Engelking did. By the way, I am being sued not as an author, but as an editor. So beware, if you ever edit a collective work, you are responsible for each and every footnote and the original source too. But this is it on a margin. So
here, Jan, we have two testimonies, is that right, in the archives, which have been sort of evaluated by Professor Engelking, and she talks about both. Is that the case?
You have even, I would say, three kinds of evidence. And what you have, one, are the witnesses in a court in 1950 speaking before the trial. That's an early stage. Then you have the same people changing completely their stories while they are in court, because that's when the village community comes together. So there is pressure, there is intimidation, and then again, people who accuse one of their own. This is a very common feature. A Holocaust historian, as I, for instance, see it in hundreds of these trials, that you look at investigation, you tend to ascribe much less importance to what happens in the courtroom, when the village community, the prosecutors, and the judges together, they come together because they actually don't want to send good Poles to prison. In any case, so you have two versions, and then the fundamental here is the once this Jewish survivor, the witness, is in the West. She actually was in Sweden, okay? She spent her life, if I am not mistaken, the rest of her life in Sweden, and that's when she gave her 6-hour-long account to the video foundation, Spielberg's, so-called Spielberg's archive, when she described simply what has happened to her in 1943 and 1944. So what you have here are different, let's say, opinions, which a historian such as I or you, let's say, evaluates. And this is our call, right? It's our call what value we assign to the testimony, a later or earlier testimony of survivors, to other testimonies.
Right.
However, and this is something we can continue later on, here the court went deeply into basically telling us historians what is the value of Jewish testimony, finding it less credible than, for instance, the positions of Polish witnesses from 1950. So this is what strikes at the very core of our profession. This is what makes it also Swedish historians, point of interest. This is in a great, let's say, a very quick overview.
This is a quick overview, but it's good because it puts the finger on what's the problem here and why this is a problem worldwide, actually, or for academic freedom for other historians as well. So yes, this is a very good good comment, because both you and I would. Yeah. Sorry, Jan.
I'll jump on, but I forgot to mention one thing. Karin, there is there is this thing with sometimes we meet at learned congresses, learned meetings to debate the future of Jewish testimony. I don't know if you partook part in this, probably you heard about this discussion. I took part in one or two meetings. One of them was with Alvin Rosenfeld in Indiana University 2 years ago. And we were debating basically, what happens once this generation of survivors is gone. And what I saw in the Polish courtroom was really the sign of the future, and this is the putting to question and gradual negation of the value of testimony of Jewish survivors. For instance, in what was striking for me was the lawyers for the opposing side repeatedly trying to tell us, look, weren't you surprised that this Jewish witness was presenting different curricula vitae? She was changing her life story, her name. Didn't it warn you about her truthfulness? Well, I mean, for a Holocaust historian who is used to Aryan papers, this is absolutely ridiculous, right? I mean, how can you accuse or put to doubt testimony of Jewish survivors because she changed her name under the occupation or after the war? I mean, my name is an Aryan name, right? My name should be Abraham. These are the papers my father bought and my grandparents bought in Warsaw in 43 or 42 rather. So they make this a sign of lack of credibility. This was for me actually very, very shocking.
It's disturbing, and it also, I think it's a question of anti-Semitism, I would say, to actually talk about whether this testimony is credible or not because it's Jewish, or it's at least an accusation in that line. Along that line,
I would never, let's say, say it in Poland. The problem, however, is that the current atmosphere in Poland, I'm not talking about this trial right now, I'm talking generally speaking, this what can be said in public sphere without any shame and consequence, this is absolutely outrageous. I mean, 5 years ago or 6, before the nationalists came to power, one wouldn't even think it possible that you could, let's say, refer to Jews as, I don't want to even use these terms, okay, and still be in Polish state media TV without any kind of consequences. The kind of reactions you can see in official media is absolutely outrageous, and there you can find all these anti-Semitic tropes: Jews who want money, Jews who want to do us Poles in, and this comes back, and this is really something that the nationalists, let's say, released forces which they released, and they added legitimacy to people who were before hidden in the darkness.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things at stake here. One being the fact that it's the whole context, as you were talking about, Jan, is lacking here, because they are evaluating testimonies, but they don't have, they're not scholars within our field, so they don't know how to evaluate this. They don't know how to interpret this. And also the whole thing that it's very weird to actually talk about this in a courtroom. Of course, every good research should be discussed and debate, and it should be, you should look into whether the sources are good. Is it the wrong interpretation or whichever, but this should be done within academia. It should not be done in a courtroom, of course.
No, looking even further, if you look at the Polish scenery, it is a part of a larger problem, which is an attempt by many governments nowadays to rewrite history to their own liking. Okay, so if you look at Russia, Turkey, Ukraine, Lithuania, all of them, they have their so-called history policies dealing with different aspects, usually World War II, but not always. And in Poland, the thing is, what they want to do is they want, I call it, to domesticate the history of the Holocaust. In other words, to present the history of the Holocaust in a benign way, in a way which can be pleasing to Polish audience, pleasing to foreign audience, And in order to do it, you have to remove people or works that go counter to this narrative. And in order to, let's say, assure the triumph of this false narrative, of this deeply flawed narrative, the Polish government funds organizations which are, it's a phenomenon on a world scale. There is an organization, institution, the IPN, the Institute of National Remembrance, with a budget of 120 million US dollars per year. I don't know how many kronor this is, but a lot more. And a lot. And they have hundreds of historians, I think more than 100 definitely, working on their staff, that are now busily producing history, a historiography, let's say. And one of their tasks was to conduct an open attack on our little group of scholars. And they are continuing to do it in the media, publishing usually extraordinarily, I would say, flawed reports. They are not reviews, they are reports. But this is this kind of institutional pressure. There is another institution working now trying to follow our footnotes, which is in the Pilecki Institute, active in Berlin. So this is, you are talking about major expenditure. It shows to you how central, from the point of view of nationalists, is the distortion of the history of the Holocaust. So this is the situation we are right now. The explosion of this is what we witness around this court case of ours.
So why is it so important for them? I find it interesting that, I mean, normally our work as historians don't really make headlines that much. I mean, it's good that people are interested, but these people are not really interested in knowing more or being more knowledgeable about the Holocaust or being more knowledgeable of what happened in Poland, which is the interest of you and Professor Engelking and of myself. Of course, we want to know and understand. We don't really want to moralize, right? But why is this so important for them? They're using it, but what are they using it for?
Well, one thing is that if you want to understand these people, by these people I mean the governing nationalists and their big chunk of their electorate, if not their entire electorate, is that for them, national history is a form of a religious experience. Okay, they draw upon their vision, mythology of history as a nourishing, let's say, source. And if you do something which puts their religion in a wrong, light, if it adds some bitter pills to this fountain of triumphant narrative, then you become, as the Germans said in the past, Volksfeind. You become an enemy of the people. So this is the defense of this national myth. In this case, it's the myth of national innocence. And it's very popular, not only with nationalists. It's, after years of education in schools, in the previous under democratic regimes too, it became a sort of a acquis communautaire thing that you have, that you carry with you. This idea that Poles as a society passed with flying colors the exam of morality during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, which is simply, a happy myth. It is not founded on any historical truth. Now, the second part, which is going beyond the idea of this dream of national innocence, which is even more equally pernicious. It's that the currently governing nationalists, they consolidate their electorate and they try to build the national identity around common imagined or real enemies. In other words, they reinforce nationalism through the creation or presentation of external, usually, or internal threats. To give you examples, one will be Jews are coming back to claim their property, or even worse, Jews are coming back to claim not their property, which is a few months ago and a year ago, an outburst in the official arena on with the background of so-called Bill 447 voted by the US Senate, obligating the US government to look at the Jewish property, Holocaust-related property around the world, it triggered unbelievable amount of tension and I would say advanced paranoia in Poland. This was the creation. We are being attacked here by Jews who are coming back to claim our houses and whatnot. But it's part of it, because if you look at the 2015 the refugee crisis, the way this has been playing out, I mean, this is what brought nationalists really to power. This was perhaps this decisive little straw that really put them into power, and it was the kind of language that the current leader of this governing party, Peace, Law and Justice, Mr. Kaczynski, said that the refugees, the migrants, I think he said, they are coming here with parasites. Now, the thing is, if in Polish political speech you use someone bringing parasites, all the wrong images from Nazi propaganda against the Jews come back, swarming back. Jews, typhus, lice. This is the kind of language you can still, in the echoes in the national memory of the occupation. And then you have now the LGBT issue, right? And you have the current Minister of Education who says, that these people are not equal to normal people. I mean, in Sweden, had someone, a Minister of Education, said something that LGBT people are not equal to normal people, I don't think she or he would have a large future, bright future in your politics. And this fellow is actually now telling the teachers what to teach. And the president who went on record that LGBT are not people, that they are ideology. So, I mean, this is the kind of a larger context of, right-wing xenophobic regimes reinforcing their hold on the population. Sorry for this, lengthy.
No, it's important, but let's also look a little bit back, because it hasn't been this for the whole time in Poland. I mean, this is, as you were saying, quite new, quite recent phenomenon, because previously there were books, and there were quite a lot of really good Holocaust research turning around sort of the idea of complicity in Poland. I'm thinking about Jan Grabowski's book, Neighbors, for instance. So there was another situation before, right? So we would like to add that too to our context. And I mean, your research has been done.
Sure. I mean, the thing is that it shouldn't be blown out of proportions too. What happened, let's say, before the nationalists, before 2015, was that there was I would say, a strong current inside Polish academia of critical examination of the past, one to which I belong, but there were many people. Now, the thing is that we were not let's say, exactly approved of by the authorities. The democratic center-leaning authorities of before were rather unhappy, but they were, Democrats, so they somehow tolerated it. So now what changed? You have undemocratic government which does not tolerate it anymore. But the problem is that before, the authorities frowned upon it too, but they didn't know exactly what to do with it. For me, what was very significant in Poland over the last 20 or 25 years, if you look at this, was that practically nothing of these findings that I am writing, that my colleagues are writing, practically nothing of it made to the school curricula. In other words, the state jealously guarded access to people's minds. And this was actually something that has been reflected in all polls, from year to year. For instance, there is a dramatic poll done over the last 25 years that wants to look at, do you think who suffered more, Poles or Jews, or equally under the occupation? And now if you put these figures together, it's up to 70% of Poles who think that Poles and Jews suffered equally, or Poles suffered more. So, I mean, this is a sign not of recent thing. This is a trend which has been this domestication of the... And for instance, Auschwitz, that becomes in today's mind mostly place of Polish, not Jewish suffering. So these things have been going on and on and on. And these people that are in government today, they didn't jump, they were not parachuted from Mars. It was a long process. And I think that Polish elites They lost the battle for our own history a long time ago, or they surrendered that battle to the right-wing nationalist extremists of various stripes, and they never really understood, I would say, the importance of history for our politics, for our future. This is something that you might want to also stress with your students. I'm stressing with my students as an example of when you abandon history, or you don't know it, it will come back haunting you.
And what is the situation now? Because you yourself are you are a Canadian citizen and a Polish citizen, but you're working in Canada. What's the situation for you and for your colleagues? Would you be able to work in Poland, for instance?
Well, the situation is very much, let's say, in flux. It changes from day to day. Just 2-3 days ago, I read an official statement made on the radio by the Polish Minister of Justice, responsible for the siege of the court system, justice system here in Poland, who denounced me and my colleague Engelking as, falsifiers of Polish history. I mean, how a minister of justice can say something like that in the midst of a trial which goes on appeal is beyond me as a Canadian. Unfortunately, as a Pole, I do understand exactly what the kind of situation is playing itself out. 1 week ago, the spokesperson for the Polish secret services, imagine this is absurd, okay? He wrote in social media that the debate surrounding this trial threatens the information security of the Polish Republic. I mean, how absurd can we? So in these conditions, when you ask how historians can work, well, I am now, of course, in Warsaw, but even if you are in Canada, remember that if we are scholars of the Holocaust, right? Now, Holocaust physically happened in Poland. The archives, all important archives are in Poland. Every second victim, 50% of the victims of the Holocaust were Polish citizens. So the thing is, what will happen to access to historians who are seen as, hostile to the official Polish narrative? I have no idea. And now, would you like, for some of yourself, would you like to publish a book in Poland on more critical examination of Polish Jewish or Jewish experience during the war? Would you like to face the wrath of the Polish state, which can sue in court in Warsaw? I don't know. So all these questions, are now that these researchers have to, even if they are foreigners. I was talking to a colleague of mine, a German historian, who is now basically saying that he is not going to allow a translation of his book be published in Poland. So we are talking about, a very unfortunate, very serious situation.
Problematic for the whole scholarly community and not only for Polish scholars. So, but there are other examples, right now in Poland. You mentioned to me when we spoke earlier about a historian and journalist. Her name is Katarina Marcus. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that situation? Right. Because this is something ongoing right now.
This is, fresh, so to say, fresh off the presses now. And the thing is that this situation evolves quickly. Just 2 weeks ago, I learned that a friend of mine, Katarina Marcus, who is this journalist and historian, she is being, it's called her words are being investigated according to a criminal investigation under so-called Article 133 of the Polish Criminal Code. So here we are not talking anymore about, a civil procedure or attempts to ruin you and your reputation in civil litigation. Here we are talking about prosecutors conducting criminal investigation into Article 133, which says, and I quote verbatim, who slanders the good name of the Polish nation shall be sentenced for up to 3 years in prison, which is a bit different scenario of this infamous Polish Holocaust law. It has been on the books before. Now, it has practically never been used. Okay. Now, one person that had this article invoked was my colleague and friend, University of Princeton Professor Jan Grabowski, who was investigated under the same article. And then at a certain point, I think 1 year ago, the State Department, he is an American citizen, the US State Department, that they would be very, very upset if any US citizen were to be charged under Article 133. And lo and behold, the investigation was dropped. Now, here you have a young scholar, a journalist, who wrote basically one sentence in an article published in a left-leaning journal. She said that Poles were complicit in the Holocaust, which of course is true, and I can sign this sentence myself right away, as did, by the way, representatives of Polish Jewish community a few days ago in a letter of support. But here you have a criminal investigation. Actually, I learned just recently there's another one opened into these similar words, criminal investigation. So we are moving into a realm that I don't know. I think that the authorities will drop these criminal proceedings, but that implies that they do think logically, which I don't think they do in this case. So I would hope they do it for their own sake and Poland's image abroad, but I don't know. And so the future here is very murky, I would say, and I'm very concerned for, and what they actually already managed to do is to freeze the atmosphere of research. Even if they drop the charges, if you are now choosing your path to the PhD in Poland, would you explore the issue of any kind of Polish complicity or the Polish-Jewish relations during that period? I don't think you would.
No, likely not. And so this is a threat to Katarina Marcus. It's a threat towards Professor Engelking, but it's also a threat towards the newspaper in which she's working. Right? Are they backing her on this? Is the institution which Professor Engelking leads? Yeah, are they backing them?
Well, I think Katarina Marcus received already support from all possible quarters. The thing is that she has not yet been charged. The whole strangeness of this Polish criminal procedure in the case of Article 133 is that you are not being still investigated. It's your words that are being investigated, and you are being heard in your own case, so to say. But you are a witness, not an accused person yet. Which is, of course, very strange. But then again, I'm speaking as a Canadian here, that usually if you are supposed to talk about your own case, you should not, let's say, accuse yourself in your own testimony. But apparently this is a different scenario here. So what the authorities probably want to see is a general freeze on any kind of research which would lead to effects or to results which would contradict their happy and merry vision of the Holocaust.
So what do you think about the future now then, Jan? We've talked a little bit about this now, but you are, of course, trying to appeal this case. You're saying that we don't agree with the verdict. So this is something that you are doing now, but what will happen in the future, you think?
Well, the thing is that we are still waiting.
What is at stake?
Yeah, we're still waiting for the written justification of the sentence, which we just heard, given orally in court. So once we see precise wording, we can with the lawyers, we can formulate our appeal. However, when you have the Minister of Justice of a system of justice which is already under siege and has been in Poland under siege for years now, when you have a Minister of Justice intervening in a process and basically determining that he is very happy with the sentence, well, if you are an appeals judge, what does it mean for the impartiality of the trial? I don't know. So these questions are ones that are really unable to respond. I don't know exactly what course of action I, as a Canadian citizen, will have, or my colleagues as Polish citizens, what are their options. However, this freezing atmosphere is certainly a major a major issue and a major problem. And you know, I can easily believe that scholars such as myself will decide that we will publish only, you know, in other languages, and and this is what authorities probably in Poland will be very happy with. So, you know,
Do you think that the sorry?
No, go ahead.
Do you think that the protests worldwide have made any difference in these cases? It did make a difference in the Jan Tomasz Gross case. Right?
Well, in Jan Tomasz Gross's case, I don't remember what it was. It was a protest was from the State Department. But what I'm very, very happy and, you know, extraordinarily grateful for is this, I would say, unprecedented rally of international scholars and organizations around us in support of our case here. I have never, to be honest, I have been a professional historian now for 34 years, if you include the PhD, and I have never ever seen anything on this scale. And I see already panicked reaction of the Polish state mobilizing their proxies, mobilizing the historians of the IPN and so on. But here on the international arena, they are outgunned, okay? So I believe that this is one thing. The second thing is it proves to us scholars that we are not mice, that we will not go in silence, so to say. That if they stifle our voices, journalists are, you know, together with us in the same boat. That this is an issue of freedom, basic freedoms, and which are whose violation is absolutely incompatible with a state that is a member of the European Union. So this, and secondly, I believe that this kind of a stand proves to us as a community of scholars that we have something more in common than our just, you know, scientific interests, that there is a bond here, that attack on the basics of our discipline triggers our reaction, and what to do in practical terms. As I mention all the time, there are institutions, okay, and there are people engaged in this extraordinary, brutal assault on history in Poland today. There are others in Russia, there are others in Turkey. I don't know their cases so well. I am speaking here in case of violations of history and historians' rights in Poland. So in terms of foreign audiences, if you encounter people working for the Polish Institute of National Remembrance, IPN, well, make your point known to them. If you are invited to a conference sponsored by them, perhaps don't go. Perhaps warn others not to do it. If you see things like so, there are measures which we even, you know, powerless academics can do. Shame people into perhaps, you know, Polish diplomat. When you ask them, why do they do it? Do they think that Holocaust distortion is something they should be proud of? So, you know, there are many kinds of things we can actually do.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think I'm very glad about this international solidarity, but I also think we should point out the solidarity within Poland. There has been a lot of protests within Poland, which is, of course, much more difficult to protest when you are within the community to protest. But I'm hoping that, for instance, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA, can put pressure also on Poland. That is an organization which should, I mean, Poland has signed a few agreements on this, and they are not really living up to this. So this is one point, of course.
Well, you know, the thing is that, as you mentioned, you're quite right. I mean, what I was actually very, very happy at was the level of support inside the intellectual community in Poland. We received, me and my colleagues received a vast amount of support, and I know that these people are, you know, sticking their head out. Especially, for instance, if I read a letter of support signed by the director of the Museum of History of Polish Jews, he is a head of a state institution, right? So this takes guts and courage, and there is the Polish Academy of Sciences, which came out in our support of us. And I would say that the deadly silence of few institutions, Jewish institutions, which I don't want to name, their silence was perhaps even more audible. But overall, it was the Jewish community was extremely outspoken, vocal in our support. So it's really encouraging, and it is a part of civic society's struggle for our freedoms, and that's it.
Yes. So, do you have anything else you would like to point towards us sitting in Sweden, for instance? Is there any? Do you have any advice for us, or because I'm saying what you spoke about on Holocaust Remembrance Day last year in Stockholm was the distortion of the history of the Holocaust. And this, of course, could be a problem in Sweden as well, the whole situation being politicized and everything. So do you have any advice for us to
I believe simply that we have to, we as academics or as intellectuals or as a community of people concerned with history and with freedom of speech as well and writing, we should brace ourselves for a long haul, that this is not, a question of one protest being signed, that we need to create perhaps funds for independent researchers to defend themselves. We need to gather strength in the long run, and we need to see how these laws translate into action in other countries too. It is a rising trend, unfortunately. It's certainly in Eastern Europe. If we are prepared to continue to be vigilant and to protest and to counteract over a longer period of time, we need to remember that this won't go away tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So thank you so much, Professor Jan Grabowski, for this talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this talk, Holocaust Research on Trial. I would like to especially say thank you to Professor Jan Grabowski for having this talk with us today. And let me remind you that you are listening to Judisk kultur I Sverige, Jewish culture in Sweden. We are online on judiskkultur.se. Please follow us there and listen to our other talks. Thank you so much and goodbye.